You turn on the television and you hear of another violent shooting. You go on Twitter and see an infamous criminal's name trending. You walk by some co-workers and listen to them discussing a podcast centered on brutal crimes. You cannot escape our cultural obsession with crime, violence, and mystery. But there's one archetypical criminal that sucks up the attention far more than anyone else. More than the bank robber, more than the mafia member, and more than the financial fraudster. The dreaded serial killer. Over the past century, society has become obsessed with serial killers, some famous, some forgotten. The explosion of true crime has merely made this obsession an unquenchable thirst. So many people hunger for knowledge concerning the worst humanity has to offer. This interest in the history of murderers has led to a curious question. Who started this trend? Obviously, murder has been around since the dawn of time, but there has to be a first written record of someone who killed someone without remorse and continued to do so. If you Google the question, you will find articles about famous killers from the 19th century, but the writer of this video has written about serial killers from centuries before that. It clearly goes back quite a ways to times and lands long since buried. We intend to unearth the past, to dive deep into the history of unrepentant criminals, going as far back as we can, century by century. This list will, of course, not be exhaustive, but it will hardly be limited as well. Some of these names you might know, but chances are you won't be familiar with many. Serial killers are as diverse as they come, all countries, all eras, all genders, all classes, all beliefs, all united by rage and bound by blood. Before we begin, it's best to define what a serial killer actually is, through its definition and the history of the phrase. The origin of the term is relatively complex. It is popularly credited to FBI Special Agent Robert Ressler, the partner of the famous mindhunter John E. Douglas. In 1974, Ressler was giving a lecture at the Bramshill Police Academy in England when he heard someone say certain crimes happen in a series, or serial. Some examples used were criminals such as John Christie and the infamous Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Ressler thought it was an interesting term, serial, something released in a sequential fashion, like the Lone Ranger series from the 1930s. In the 1970s, Ressler and Douglas would interview dozens of killers with large body counts in an attempt to understand them from a psychological standpoint. Sometime in this period, Ressler started using the term serial killer. By 1977, when Son of Sam was captured in New York, the term was internally around but not very common. Serial killing as a phrase in popular media didn't catch on until 1981. The New York Times described the Atlanta child murderer as such. The term was around before Ressler coined it, however. The word, and excuse my German, Serienmörder, which can translate to serial killer or murderer, was used by German detective Ernst August Ferdinand Genat in 1930 to describe Peter Kürten, the so-called vampire of Dusseldorf. This case lives on culturally as the direct inspiration for the Fritz Lang movie M. Now, this might still not even be the first mention of the term. In 1927, a Dutch newspaper described a character in the film The Coming of Amos as a Serienmoordenaar, and please excuse my Dutch for that one, which also translates into serial killer or murderer. There yet may be an older usage of the term that has yet to be discovered, but until then, these facts remain. The term was used as early as the late 1920s, but only became popular decades later due to the work of a determined FBI special agent. Now, what is the definition of a serial killer? Well, that depends on who's asking. The FBI classifies it as 2 separate murders over a period of time, but a lot of psychologists put the number at 3. The method and motivation mostly does not matter. What matters is the so-called cooling off period between murderers, which is usually weeks or months, but even sometimes years. This is to not mix them up with mass murderers or spree killers, people who kill multiple individuals at once, or several victims at several locations in rapid succession, respectively. For example, John Wayne Gacy is a serial killer because of the cooling off period between his murders, which were frequently months apart. Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower Sniper, is considered a mass murderer because he killed all his victims in one area. Andrew Cunanan is regarded as a spree killer as he killed 5 people in different states over the course of 4 months, with 4 being killed within 2 weeks. In the most technical ways, animals can also be considered serial killers. Creatures like the Savile man-eater, Gustav the crocodile, and the perpetrator of the 1916 New Jersey shark attacks do actually fit the criteria to a degree. Of course, nobody reasonably considers them serial killers. For the purpose of this video, our definition is a human who killed 3 people with notable gaps in between lasting at least a month. With all of that being said, it's finally time to travel back into the annals of crime history and find out who was history's first recorded serial killer. As previously stated, in 1981, the term serial killer was first used by modern media to describe the Atlanta child killer, Wayne Williams, even though someone like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, was probably the first killer to ever be called one. The term was retroactively soon used to describe people like the Zodiac Killer and Ted Bundy. Of course, criminals like these had been around throughout the 20th century, with plenty sadly getting away. The Texarkana Moonlight Killer, or the Phantom Killer, was one such example. In the titular town in 1946, someone attacked 8 people, killing 5 starting the month of February. Like Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, this individual terrorized the city, leading to people barricading the doors or leaving altogether. The attacks were typically in lovers' lanes or on the side of the road. The weapon most often used was a .32 caliber revolver. A man named Ewell Swinney was suspected of being the killer, but was never fully proven. The murders stopped suddenly in May and never resumed again. These murders were later used as the inspiration for The Town That Dreaded Sundown, one of the first slasher films. Unknown killers attacking people at night were also recorded in Depression-era New York. A man with a distinctive German accent shot and killed 2 individuals within a few weeks of each other in 1930. He later sent letters claiming to be an individual known as 3X. The killer claimed to be a member of a spy ring called the Red Diamond of Russia, and that his motivations were purely logical, even though what he said was beyond incomprehensible. He claimed to be taking out members of his group that had betrayed him. Such an organization doesn't even exist on record though. 2 more murders 7 years later in 1937 might have been him, but this can't be proven definitively. In between all this were random phone calls and general harassment to anybody interested in the story. The New York 3X murders are perhaps the most bizarre unsolved murders in US history, with not a single aspect of the case making any sense. Whether this man was really a spy or deranged individual making up a story, we cannot say for sure, although the latter feels more likely. He might be a forgotten monster of New York, but infamous killers haunting American cities are nothing new. H.H. Holmes has become quite the boogeyman for the city of Chicago, often called America's first serial killer, a man who built a murder castle that would put Jigsaw to shame, a man with a body count said to be over 200, even sometimes said to be Jack the Ripper. These claims are all patently false, of course. Some were made up years after his execution, some were made up by Holmes himself. Holmes was a habitual liar. His favorite pastime was financial fraud, after all. He just didn't have a problem killing people to get that money. The Chicago hotel dubbed the Murder Castle was never open to the public. It was merely a way to defraud financiers. He confessed to 27 murders, but in reality, he only killed 9 at most, starting in 1891. Some names he admitted to killing were people still alive. While he was a doctor, his methods of murder seemed to be strangulation and the use of chemicals to asphyxiate his victims. His birth names wasn't even Henry Howard Holmes. It was Hermer Webster Mudgett. Yes, Mudgett. Holmes was a vile man, but he wasn't the devil incarnate as newspapers often claimed. He was merely a con man willing to go further than most.
I think we've heard quite enough.
Enough? Oh, I've barely begun, Your Honor. You don't seem to understand. I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer any more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. Bury me deep, Your Honor. Make sure they fill my pine box with cement. Put me deeper than anyone else and cover the ground with more cement, 'cause trust me, just being dead ain't enough to stop me from killing again.
Was he America's first serial killer? Not even close. Although speaking of devils that haunted cities, there is one individual we sadly cannot avoid discussing.
Ripper.
Yes, the legendary monster of Whitechapel. Leather Apron, Saucy Jack, probably the most discussed serial killer in history. The writer of this video previously put out a 2-hour video on this miserable individual, so we won't repeat ourselves too much. What's worth emphasizing is that there's nothing remarkable about Jack. The 5 innocent women he killed were far more remarkable. The only reason we even need to mention was that he was the first serial killer in a way. He was perhaps the first to receive international attention via newspapers. It's also why so many killers continue to get the nickname Ripper after 1888, as if emulating a misogynist who targeted women while they slept is somehow glorious. Remember Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Kate, and Mary Jane, not this failure of a human. Now, an individual who's very much unique is Jane Toppan. Born Honora Kelly in Boston around 1854, this Irish woman lived a fairly sad life, losing a mother to tuberculosis and a father to alcoholism and madness. Kelly and her 2 sisters were eventually sent to an orphanage. Life didn't improve much at that orphanage. One sister was later committed to an asylum, the other became a prostitute. Kelly, after spending 2 years in the orphanage, became an indentured servant for the Toppan family of Lowell, Massachusetts. Although not adopted, she eventually became close with the family and even changed her name to Jane Toppan. In time, she became a fairly popular nurse. Everyone who knew called her Jolly Jane. Nobody suspected she had been poisoning patients with morphine and atropine since at least 1885. She would pick out a patient and test these deadly chemicals on them, eventually getting in bed with them so she could see their souls leave their body. Male or female, she didn't care. She just loved seeing people die. It made her feel good. She was eventually fired from the hospital for theft and reckless behavior. Toppan later became a private nurse and continued to poison people until she was caught after killing almost an entire family. Eventually, she confessed to 31 murders, but was found guilty of only 12. Some put the estimated victims at around 100, but that's unlikely. Despite claiming to be entirely sane, she was found not guilty in a court by reason of insanity and spent the rest of her life in the asylum, dying at age 84 in 1938. Toppan is unique for being a female lust killer. She poisoned people for sexual thrills. What caused the behavior is unknown. In a confession she supposedly sent to the notoriously unreliable New York Journal, she said it was heartbreak. According to the journal, she had said,
"If I had been a married woman, I probably would not have killed all those people. I would have had my husband, my children, and my home to take up my mind."
The truth was likely closer to her original confession. Beyond the joy of killing, she herself did not know why she did such horrific acts. As she said,
"Something comes over me. I don't know what it is. I seem to have some sort of paralysis of thought and reason. I have an uncontrollable desire to give poison without regard to consequences. I have no objection against my feelings, but I don't know my own mind. I don't know why I do these things."
Whether she understood her actions or not, Jane Toppan was one of the worst female killers of the 19th century. She was hardly the only killer in America who ran a legitimate business, however. In isolated Labette County, Kansas in 1871, a family of 4 arrived called the Benders. It consisted of John and Ma, with their children John Jr. and Kate. Or at least that's what they said. It's possible they weren't really a family. Rumor had it that Kate was married to the man claiming to be her brother. The origin of the Benders is impossible to decipher. Family or not, we only know what they did upon moving to Kansas. The 4 ran a general store and an inn 8 miles outside the tiny town of Cherryvale, catering to travelers on the Great Osage Trail. As the months went on, travelers would disappear without warning, vanishing without a trace. What nobody knew was that the Bender family were all murderers. They would invite a guest into the inn while at dinner. John, or John Jr., would strike the victim in the head with a hammer. Kate would then cut the victim's throat before tossing them into a trapdoor. After the victim had expired, the Benders would bury them in a nearby orchard. This continued until 1873, when they killed a doctor who was related to a prominent Civil War veteran and politician. Now, this drew a lot of attention to Labette County, and the Bender family soon fled in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. The bodies were found in the orchard soon after they disappeared. Anywhere between 11 and 20 victims were reported. The Bloody Benders remained the most infamous family in Kansas history, having been written about by the author of The Little House on the Prairie and appearing in the video game Red Dead Redemption 2.
This place used to be a pig farm when we was kids. Before we lost our ma and pa. Horrible business.
Horrible.
We still got each other, ain't that right, honey pie?
And we still know how to have a hog killing time.
They were terrible, but weren't the first killers to kill for profit. When the Ripper was terrorizing London, many people were reminded of a decades-old pair of criminals. William Burke and William Hare were 2 Irish-born working-class men who lived in a lodge near Edinburgh, Scotland. At the time, doctors practicing on bodies for educational purposes was semi-illegal. Only the bodies of convicted criminals and other disgraced individuals could be used. The demand was consistently high for cadavers, and the number of usable bodies was always low. However, medical professors were willing to pay good money for corpses and didn't exactly care where they came from. Thus, a new ghastly trade was born. This grim profession usually consisted of digging up bodies of recently deceased people and selling them to doctors. Individuals who did this became known as resurrection men. In November 1827, a man staying at Burke and Hare's lodge died suddenly, so they sold his body to a local doctor. Later, another man was slowly dying, so they suffocated him to speed up his demise. The two soon realized they had a golden opportunity. Instead of digging up corpses, Burke and Hare would kill people and sell bodies for cash. The two also worked with their wives. It was a close-knit group of people willing to commit the gravest of crimes in the name of profit. The victims were always people society cared little for: the elderly, the sick, and the homeless. The police eventually suspected Burke and Hare of being murderers, but couldn't prove it. It took a witness finding a body under Burke's bed to get the two arrested. And during the trial, the police realized they needed insider information in order to convict the two. So, a pardon was offered. Hare jumped at the opportunity and ratted out his partner. Hare confessed to killing 16 people alongside Burke. Burke was quickly tried, found guilty, and hanged on January 28, 1829. Hare was let go and never seen again. In a final twist of dramatic irony, Burke's body was dissected and sent to the Edinburgh Medical School, where it resides to this day. For many British citizens, Burke and Hare were the first serial killers. In reality, they weren't the first pair of vicious murderers to be born in the 18th century. The first recorded serial killers in US history are most likely the Harpe Brothers. Their origins are very unclear, but this we know. They were probably born in Orange County, North Carolina, the children of Scottish immigrants. Joshua Harper was born sometime before 1768. His little brother William Harper came into this world sometimes before 1770. It's also entirely possible they were cousins. We just don't know. Even their names aren't consistent. Occasionally they are reversed, with Joshua being the younger and William being the older. Regardless, the Harper children didn't keep these names for long. At some point they changed their names to Micah, Big Harp, and Wiley, Little Harp. Around 1775, the two siblings left North Carolina to become slave overseers in Virginia. This enterprise was eventually interrupted by war. When the American Revolution began, the duo sided with the British Empire, but they didn't join the regular army. They were members of the pro-Tory outlaw bands that attacked the local civilians, raping, pillaging, and killing much as they could. As the war dragged on, such organizations were officially recognized and admitted into the British Army as militiamen. The Harpe Brothers were present at the Battle of Kings Mountain in South Carolina on October 7, 1780. British forces lost the battle, but the Harpes escaped unscathed. They would later participate in the battles of Blackstocks and Cowpens. As the war winded down following the British loss at Yorktown, the Harpe Brothers fled westward into Kentucky and Tennessee. They continued to fight and kill patriots alongside the Chickamauga Cherokee Indians. The Harpers' final fight was the Battle of Blue Licks, almost killing future frontier legend Daniel Boone. With the war finally over, most people would have settled down and tried to live a peaceful life. For a time, the Harpes did settle down. They even got married. It wouldn't stay peaceful for very long. Starting in 1797, the two became river pirates, criminals who preyed on individuals going down the many passages and rivers on the frontier. Unlike most pirates, they tended to brutally murder their victims and not take any money. The Harpe Brothers cut forth a bloody trail of violence and death across the Mississippi River and the Natchez Trace. They would shoot, bash, and stab their victims to death, including babies. The brothers eventually teamed up with a fellow river pirate named Samuel Mason, who was held up in a cave in rock along the Ohio River. All these attacks forced the young United States government to take action. The governor of Kentucky demanded that the two be brought to justice. The end came for Micah Harpe on August 24, 1799. He was caught by a posse and shot in the leg and back. He confessed to several murders while dying. They slowly cut his head off. The group showed no mercy to him. Wiley lived on for several more years, continuing to rob and kill alongside Samuel Mason. By then, the bounty for capturing or killing these criminals was quite high. Mason never considered turning in his criminal associate, but the allure of riches proved too tempting to the young Harpe. At some point, the sole surviving Harpe brother attacked Mason and decapitated him. Setting a chance for some money, Wiley returned to the authorities with Mason's head, but they immediately identified him. The one time the violent river pirate had wanted wealth, he paid the ultimate price. Wiley Harpe was hanged in 1804, ending the spree of the most infamous river pirates in US history. Collectively, the Harpe brothers admitted to 39 murders, but the number is possibly as high as 50. The cultural legacy of the Harpe brothers had been pitiful at best, with the only notable appearances post-mortem being a cameo as jury members of The Damned and The Devil and Daniel Webster.
Big little Harpe, robbers and murderers?
And most amusingly, as fodder to be beaten by Davy Crockett in the beloved 1950s Disney series. While certainly America's first recorded serial killers, they weren't the first citizens born under a European flag that killed without mercy. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubry, Marquise de Brinvilliers, was a French aristocrat born in 1630. Marie was never expected to inherit her father's estate, despite being the eldest child. She had little interest in being loyal to the husband she was forced to marry, preferring to stay with a secret lover. Marie later tried to divorce her husband, but all these actions embarrassed her father, leading to her lover getting 2 months in the infamous Bastille prison. This was the last straw. She had learned how to create poisons when her boyfriend was let out. Prior to killing her family, Marie was set to test out poisons on hospital patients. How many she killed is unknown. Marie's father soon fell ill and died suddenly in 1666. Quite ironic when you consider the number. Local doctors believed he died of gout instead of poison, so she inherited some of the money. But she spent it all too quickly and soon had to kill her brothers. This was far less subtle, but it still was enough to bring the law down on her. She then decided to kill her sister and her in-laws, but fate intervened. Her boyfriend died abruptly, but when his room was being cleared, a chest containing letters, a note, and vials of poison were found. The note more or less admitted he and Marie had been murdering people for inheritance money. She soon fled Paris and was on the run for years before eventually being caught. She was tried and found guilty of murdering her father and 2 brothers. The hospital killings were only discovered after the trial. Marie was then decapitated by sword for all to see before her body was burned. Her legacy was causing the affair of the poisons, a massive citywide panic concerning the belief that other people had been helping Marie poison the rich and powerful. In the end, over 200 people were arrested and 36 were executed. A minor noblewoman getting caught murdering people. I bet that might ring a few bells. There exists a type of serial killer that we'll call the high nobility killer. It includes 1830s New Orleans slave owner Madame Delphine Lalaurie, the 1760s Russian noblewoman Daria Nikolaevna Slytklova, and the wicked 17th century Chilean Catalina de los Rios y Lisbegoin. These individuals all felt they were above the law and tortured to death people they deemed beneath them. They were all terrible people, but one individual stands above them all. Countess Elizabeth Báthory is no doubt a familiar name to many people. Like the Ripper, this isn't the first time one of our writers has discussed her in depth, but that was in the faraway past of 2020. She has only gained in popularity since that video was released, mostly in part for inspiring the now beloved video game character Lady Alcina Dimitrescu in Resident Evil Village.
Now, let's take a look at him. Well, Ethan Winters. You escaped my little brother's idiot games, did you? Let's see how special you are.
This itself is hardly new. One could spend all day talking about the long pop culture shadow Madame Báthory Cat, but to avoid repeating that previous video, that shadow obscures wanton cruelty on a scale nearly incomprehensible. Her actions were beyond vile, torturing to death hundreds of little girls for seeming pleasure and enjoyment starting around 1585 and lasting until 1610. The legend of blood bathing is somehow a tamer lie than the awful truth. There was nothing cool or sexy about her. She is still, without question, one of the worst murderers in history. She was also probably the first recorded serial killer from Hungary. But she wasn't the first recorded serial killer. We can still go back further. In 1581, while Báthory still drew breath, a German bandit faced a grim eternity. His name was Peter Niers. He had been one hell of a feared criminal. He had led a group of bandits throughout the Germanic lands beginning in 1566, killing and robbing anyone he met. He was said to be quite clever at disguises, always prepared with 2 loaded guns and 2 swords. After countless years of terror, he was finally captured by local authorities and tortured into confessing his crimes. According to legend, he admitted to killing 554 people. His execution lasted for 3 days. Oil was poured onto him before being broken on the wheel 42 separate times. He was then dismembered. Niers wasn't the only 16th century German executed in spectacular fashion. A couple of years later, in 1589, a man named Peter Stump was accused of being a savage werewolf that had killed and eaten over a dozen people, including one of his own children. Stump was eventually beheaded after being broken on the wheel following days of torture. What sets Niers apart from people like Stump is the body count. 544 is quite large. A little too large to believe. He was likely guilty of being a bandit, but murdering that many people, tearing people's hearts out, and practicing black magic feels more like lies born of torture. The life and death of Peter Niers eventually inspired a fake serial killer, a man named Christian Genepitinja, who supposedly killed 964 people, a number too absurd to believe. Regardless how many people he really killed, Peter Niers is an early example of what would now qualify as a serial killer, but he wasn't the first person to reap the souls of the innocent in Europe. Dame Alice Kyteler was a Flemish woman born in Kilkenny Island, roughly around 1263. She was quite the remarkable lady, aggressive, headstrong, exceedingly wealthy, and of course powerful. She was an influential moneylender and held familial connections with key officials in the Irish Parliament. She was even acquainted with King Edward I of England. She also married 4 wealthy husbands. Said husbands would conveniently sign all their money and sometimes property to Alice and her son William before dying suddenly, starting sometime before or after 1300. Rumors were spread about her, but little was ever done. What few attempts were made all failed. The Lady Kyteler was not someone to be trifled with. This all ended when the biological children of her last husband accused Alice of poisoning him. The children then took it a step further, claiming she was a sorceress, a witch. Alice was among the first women in European history to be accused of witchcraft. She used all her connections, wealth, and power to try and avoid persecution from religious authorities, but it was to no avail. She fled the Emerald Isles in 1324 before the church caught up with her. But those around her were left to fend for themselves, including her son William. One of her maidservants, Cornelia of Meath, was grabbed, tortured into confessing, and burned at the stake. Various other people who worked for the Lady Kyteler also greatly suffered. Dame Alice Kyteler was never seen again, likely fleeing to England and living out the rest of her life. Nowadays, it's assumed by some historians that she had been poisoning her husbands for financial gain, not to further a relationship with the devil. She was likely the first recorded serial killer of the Middle Ages. But remarkably, we can still perhaps go back a little further. Locusta was a woman born in Gaul, first mentioned around 54 AD. She was something of an expert in poisons. She personally served the Roman Empress Agrippina the Younger, and supposedly created the poison used in the murder of her husband Claudius. Locusta was in prison at the time for an unrelated poisoning. Agrippina was eventually murdered by her son Nero, but he didn't kill the Locusta. Instead, he saw a golden opportunity. Locusta was still imprisoned, but quickly agreed to assist Nero all the same, becoming his personal poisoner. She provided him with the poison used to kill his brother Britannicus. This murder rewarded Locusta with a full pardon and a house provided she helped him get rid of the problems when the time came and teach certain people in the art of poison making. She gladly continued to assist the wicked emperor in whatever task he did until his untimely demise by suicide in 68 AD. The new emperor, Galba, saw no use in a woman who liked to poison people, so he had her executed in 69 AD after being dragged through Rome in chains. She wasn't killed by a draft, as some stories depict. It's difficult to say if Locusta counts as a serial killer. She fits the profile of a hitman, which technically is a category in and of itself, but she is mentioned as someone who immensely enjoyed killing people, so it's up in the air whether she counts. She definitely is one of the first people in history that could reasonably be considered a serial killer, but not the first. We can still go back further to the BC era. Liu Pengli was a Chinese prince during the ancient Han dynasty. At the age of 29, he was the prince of Zhejiang in the year 144 BC. Pengli was the nephew of Emperor Jing, eventual cousin of legendary Emperor Wu, and quite the aggressive man. The grand historian Sima Qian wrote that Pengli had a favorite hobby. Pengli would wander the countryside with slaves in tow, attacking any peasant they came across. He would personally kill and steal from these peasants purely for the fun of it. He killed over 100 people before the son of a peasant begged the emperor to do something. The emperor took all of Pengli's lands, made him a commoner, and banished him, but didn't execute him. Pengli soon vanished into history, never to be written about again. The historical source on Pengli is interesting because Sima Qian was alive when these crimes were supposedly happening, but there have been recent questions about whether Pengli was really murdering people or whether this was just a political ploy to damage the emperor's reputation. It was a relatively complicated time politically for the Han rulers, and such claims would do much damage. The evidence is far too ancient to honestly tell fact from fiction, but if we take the grand historian at his word, then Liu Pengli was an extremely early example of a serial killer. He still would not be the first to be recorded. It's the year 331 BC. Rome is still a republic, not an empire. Roman men are dying at a notably quick rate, far more than usual. Roman leaders believe it was merely a plague until a servant girl came forward with a startling accusation. She says that an entire group of women is poisoning Romans, led by two patrician women named Sergia and Cornelia. These two women were summoned to the forum to answer for their actions. They claimed it wasn't poison they were creating, they were making medicine to help with the plague. Upon being asked to demonstrate the healing properties of this concoction, Sergia and Cornelia took the medicine and promptly died. Dozens of women were arrested for helping the two poison innocent Romans, and the plague quickly ended. It was written that the two women seemed to be killing people for no good reason, and act driven by madness more than anything else. Sergia and Cornelia are likely the first recorded serial killers in history, but it comes with a mighty catch. The person who recorded these events was Titus Livius, a man known for making fables and morality plays out of history. He also recorded these events 100 years after they transpired, making it quite likely he exaggerated details to create a message about not trusting women. Even states he wasn't sure if the event happened. Sergia and Cornelia may have well been real people, but beyond that, little more can be confirmed. Now, there is one last person to discuss, and while he wasn't a real person, he demonstrates that people like him were understood even in ancient Greece. Procrustes was a mythological figure, a son of Poseidon. He was something of a bandit, but he didn't operate like other criminals. He lived in a house on the side of the road near Attica. He'd invite travelers in and ask them to sleep in his iron bed. When they did, he would either stretch their legs to fit on the bed using a hammer if they were too short, or cut them off with a saw or axe if they were too long. The victims would die either way. He was eventually defeated by the Greek hero Theseus, the man who slew the Minotaur. Theseus tricked Procrustes into sitting on his own bed. Theseus then proceeded to kill him with his own axe. Procrustes is clearly not just a story. It does sound like a serial killer. A man greeting travelers and killing them for fun over a period of time does fit the general profile of a serial killer. Perhaps whoever wrote this tale was inspired by similar crimes in ancient Greece that went unrecorded. Dating this legend is a bit difficult, but a vase showing Theseus killing Procrustes dates back to 470 BC, centuries before Livy spoke of Sergia and Cornelia, or Sima Qian mentioned Liu Pengli. We finally reached the end of the serial killer paper trail in history. As you can see, the act of murdering fellow humans in a series has been depicted since the ancient Grecians, and doubtlessly occurred long before even that. It has been done by men and women, people of all continents, with one person or many, with all known types of weapons and numerous motivations. So, who was actually the first recorded serial killer? That remains a difficult question, as it's clear Procrustes was merely a mythical figure possibly inspired by people in Greece long since forgotten. Was it Sergia and Cornelia, the decadent Roman prisoners? We would say no. While the story is intriguing, there are no contemporary sources to confirm if the event even happened, let alone if two women were leading a poison ring. Was it Liu Pengli, the Chinese prince who murdered dozens? Well, it's nice that a contemporary historian wrote down his actions. It's entirely possible the accusations were politically motivated, and unlike someone like Báthory, there exists so little information that we cannot interpret truth from fiction. Was it Locusta of Gaul, the personal killer for several Roman emperors? No, she doesn't really fit the criteria for a serial killer. Whether she liked her job or not, she was only killing when told to kill. If she hadn't been paid, she probably wouldn't have killed anyone. An assassin, yes, but a serial killer, no. In our humble opinion, the first person who can reasonably be classified as a serial killer with enough contemporary evidence is Alice Kyteler, the Sorceress, the Witch of Kilkenny. In life, she was neither of these two. She was just an opportunistic woman who desired wealth and power. Marrying and killing wealthy men was the easiest way to achieve these goals. She was what we would call a Black Widow killer. She probably did love her oldest son, but Báthory cared for her children too. Alice felt nothing poisoning husband after husband, only being afraid when religious authorities came after her. She felt nothing for her own servant being executed in her stead. Even the love of her child came second when her life was on the line. In Ireland today, she is treated as a tourist attraction, a witch, and nothing more. We say she was more than that. History's first recorded serial killer with enough documented evidence was a woman born in Ireland in the 13th century. One only wonders what she would think of the world she left behind, the legacy she still holds, and the future world obsessed with serial killers we created in her image.
You may know my name. You may know my deeds. But do you truly know me? We serve your food. We say hello to you on your way to work. We look like you. We talk like you. We share common interests and passions. We are your friends, your family. Our crime? Merely using our charm, our wit to build something from nothing. Creativity? So often valued, but only when you play by the rules. My name is Alice Kyteler, but the common people call me Dame. Why was that? Wasn't because I had a shred of royal blood, fear and respect. With my own two hands, I became someone. How different are we truly? What's the difference between you and me? Is it that I'm not afraid of the dark impulses of humanity? Did I accept what we are? Or does that make you too uncomfortable? It is easier in your mind to banish people like myself to a place forgotten where we can fester like nightmares into werewolves, vampires, witches, and serial killers. The difference between us is so minor. We all have had people who care about us. We all dreamed of a better life. We all have tried to make that dream real. For me, this meant merely inhabiting the lives of certain individuals. What does it matter that I did what I did? The graveyard is such a lovely place. We'll all end up there. Young and old. A soul doesn't need to be taken kicking and screaming into the afterlife. I was a gardener, nourishing my vegetables and pruning weeds, for the deepest root requires the greatest care to remove. A life can be taken gently and slowly, so as to be imperceptible. There are so many other gardeners in the world. I wasn't the first, just the earliest to be written about in detail. Why? Because I was condemned as a conspirator with the devil. People will always banish those that remind them that the abyss exists in their hearts. Should I apologize for the truth? For my actions? I've watched how you people live your lives. You tell stories about me to pass time and to scare others. My name is now mockery and entertainment. I've been desecrated. Nothing has changed. The living fears the dead, and the dead envies the living. We resent those who still can experience the joys of breath, of love, of fortune. But the mockery is always repaid in misery. One day, you'll join me in the cold, cold earth. Your body will shut down. Time will slow and cease. You will be but briefly mourned as you turn to dust, when the maggots have eaten the last morsel of your flesh. I will be there, and you will be forgotten. Slán go fóill.